Good afternoon, everyone. Get myself situated here. So yeah, I wanted to talk about some of the challenges we've identified in the United States, many of which are not unique to the United States. We'll hear about some of them if we haven't already here, and then take that a little bit step further and talk about where are there opportunities that we can further cooperate. And before I do that, some of you might be thinking, where's this guy from? He said something about Texas. So just very briefly about Texas A&M Transportation Institute. Some of you may know us as TTI. We're housed in College Station, Texas, but we have several locations throughout the state. We're very large, university-based research organization, over 700 individuals, over half of that full-time researchers like myself. We're unique, and I think it's nice in that we're a state agency, but then we're also a university agency. This is nice because it gives us a little bit more of a unique opportunity to really get some of our work out into practice. Like many of the academic organizations represented, we have a threefold mission, really focusing on solving those transportation problems, transferring that technology, and developing the future workforce, the students. A fair amount of international presence as well. I've worked in many different countries throughout the world, including Belgium here, where we stand right now, in a number of areas. Very multimodal. In fact, I need to update this slide. We need to, because over the last 15 or so years, we've taken really a big push into active transportation, so non-motorized, bicycle, pedestrian as well, and really touch on all these areas. I run an area in mobility, so I touch on mobility, of course, safety, environment, freight movement, economics, planning, infrastructure, policy, several of these different areas. And then the other hat that I want to give you 30 seconds on before I move into some of the other content is the committee. Many of you are familiar with Transportation Research Board, but I know some of you are not. TRB is part of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. I'm chair of the Urban Freight Committee, which is one of over 250 committees. I think we're up close to 270 now, with volunteers from public, private, academic agencies. Many of you, I have some of committee members here as well, and appreciate everyone's help. And this is what we're concerned with, all the topics essentially that we're talking about today and over the next couple of days. The bottom line there is important, providing support to practitioners. And I think that's a theme that you're hearing from Henriette, Tomiko, and you'll hear from me as well. How do we get this stuff into practice? Tomiko briefly mentioned the TRB annual meeting in January. You're all welcome. I hope you can make it. We have a meeting for our committee. We also do a number of sessions and then a workshop. And we're going to have our second annual meeting workshop on the Sunday to look further at some of the challenges facing urban freight. This is the workshop that Tomiko mentioned. And really, how can we take that then a step further and really evaluate how well did we do, where do we go from here? Out of the Sunday workshop that we did the last time in January, we had 7 sort of key areas that rose to the top when we had our breakouts and discussions. There were a number of themes that came up. So I wanted to throw them up here. I know several of you have already touched upon some of these things, so it's nice to see we really are tackling a lot of the same things. I'll hit the high points. There might be more details in here that you can read that I may not call out. But first and foremost, do we have the right stakeholders? Do we have the right players involved as we're trying to implement some of these freight strategies? Externalities, unintended consequences. Everything's free, nearly immediate in terms of shipping. What is that doing to our transportation system? What is that doing to our supply and demand and infrastructure? And how do we rethink how we do a lot of different things? The interactions between freight and land use. E-commerce has been mentioned a couple of times already, and it will be mentioned, I'm sure, many more times. In the United States, we've got a record pace of brick and mortar stores just shutting down, and that space becoming available simply because of the increase in e-commerce. And they're calling for even faster rises in the brick and mortars closing up, and it's only just April, and they're talking about the year having more than ever. Interactions between freight and land use. So how can we tackle the zoning and development issues? such that we really handle the truck deliveries a little bit better, whether it's development agreements, zoning requirements, regulations, and so forth, improving the efficiency of the supply chain. When it really boils down to it, that's what the perfect data are, right? Is what are the little parts and how are they moving along those supply chains? How can we better understand that? And where can we find the data to inform that, which is also a challenge. Linkages between the freight and the socioeconomics. What's driving the growth or non-growth in freight depending upon where you're at? And are we being equitable in the amount or ability to get freight shipments? Something else to think about. And just in general, everybody wants to better understand what's the overall state of the practice, who's doing what. Resources are limited. We need to sort of build upon each other's successes and failures so that we can take things a step further. And that could be anywhere, international forums, that could be national, regional, state, city, down to the neighborhood level, and I would even argue down to the curb level of who's doing what and how can we learn from each other. That's one effort. Another I'll mention is some work that we're also involved with at TTI, and it's through the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, NCHRP. Some of you are probably familiar. If you're not, you can just think about this as State Department of Transportation funding that is pushed towards topics of interest. So this particular project is tasked with identify the freight projects that we should do in the future. This work will be finalized in September, but we've got 5 things that have sort of risen to the top already. These first 4 I've touched upon and came up quite a bit in the workshop that we held back at TRB. So this lack of information on the performance measurement of the system for really a multimodal supply chain. Lack of data to help us inform policy and planning. The whole autonomous connected vehicles that are coming online and the multimodal delivery equipment that's going to come. What are the impacts? How do we prepare for that? Addressing the impacts of e-commerce, which I've mentioned so many times already, and we'll talk, I'm sure, a lot about over the next couple of days. The last one that I didn't mention in my prior 7 points, but was certainly there in the workshop, just didn't rise to the top quite as high as some of the others, is achieving resiliency and recovery in the multimodal freight systems. We've had a lot of weather issues. We've had a lot of hurricanes. We've had a lot of things in the United States which have made us realize, geez, we need some redundancy in our system because, you know, in Houston, for example, after Hurricane Harvey came through, easy for me to say, we had 12 feet of water over I-10. I mean, it totally changes how trucks and the goods are moved. So we have a number of challenges. If you're doing work, you're going to pop your head up for this because this is pretty cool. I'm pretty proud of this moment. But we're going to persevere, so we can't quit, right? And so I put some thought into this, and look at this. So we can all do it. This is my one clever idea probably for the year. So together we can all do this. We can look for opportunities for us to identify some synergies and ways to cooperate. And here are a few things that I think we should do and I think we should continue to do. In many cases, we're doing this. Information, peer exchanges such as we have here, the twinnings, the success of the twinning program with Urban Freight, and hopefully we can certainly keep that moving. Conferences. Mutual education and training programs was another idea that we had. Maybe it's continuing education. Maybe it's executive training into the private sector that needs some. So, for example, in the U.S., if we want some experiences from those in European markets, can bring those individuals over and vice versa. Another one is collaboration on project proposals or the projects themselves after they're done. Certainly Europe and US are encouraging this international cooperation where we have to provide our funding to bring the funding to the projects in both entities, but perhaps there's opportunities to expand that to each other in the future. And the final thought, maybe topical partnerships between research agencies, whether it's on a mobility group or urban freight and trying to target specific projects in specific areas where we could have some international research groups. And we have some examples of this. Maybe these things could be formalized a bit. Exchanging staff, students, and certainly serving on advisory boards for one another in different cases. And so I think all of the stakeholders are involved with all of this. I didn't spell it out in the interest of time, but industry, of course, is prolific throughout this, public agency staff, such as Chris that you'll hear from in a moment. private sector, like I said, and then, the educational component. And so this is me. If you want to learn more, TTI website on the top. Second one down is the group that I had in mobility. And then finally, the Urban Freight Conference, the Urban Freight TRB website is the last one. So I look forward to conversations over the next couple of days and look forward to discussing how we can help the partnership with TRB. And of course, then I do some research in this area myself. So I'm really looking forward to it, and thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, Bill will be around for the coming 1.5 days.
Yes.
What I really liked about you is that you yourself are a researcher, but I also see that you're in many policy discussions and also that you're in many research, so both in the transport policy field and in the research policy field. How does that feel?
Yeah. It's really nice. In fact, I am a PE, professional engineer, but I often joke that stands more for political engineer than actually professional engineer, because the politics is everywhere, and it is just sort of part of what we all have to deal with. So I think understanding that landscape, and I probably work more in the team building side of things and understanding the planning aspects. So it's really exciting for me to be able to see all the different parts and bringing freight is so multi-dimensional. I think it's sort of a natural for all of us, and many of you, I know many of you, and those of you that don't, I would probably speculate that you enjoy that. You enjoy being able to bring in the different stakeholders at some level and work on challenging projects that allow you to really pull in from different areas.